The Boy and the Heron. It began airing in the Japanese cinemas in July 14, 10 years after The Wind Rises, the previous Ghibli film that was directed and written by Hayao Miyazaki sensei, and 9 years after When Money Was There, another Ghibli film which was an adaptation of an English novel of the same name. The Boy and the Heron has finally reached my country, so I had to watch it. Fun fact, I actually have never seen a Ghibli film. I know you're probably thinking, this guy talks about anime but he has never seen a single Ghibli film. Well, I have my reasons, but mainly because I usually am not interested in watching anime films. I usually only watch those that are already part of a bigger series like the Fate movies. But since it was appearing in the cinemas and I had time during the weekends, I said, why not? It's gonna be my first Ghibli film and the first work I will see from Hayao Miyazaki sensei. So I was really excited. What do the works of the man who has left a huge mark on the anime industry look like? Not only because of the Oscar won by Spirited Away, but also because of the numerous highly acclaimed titles like Princess Mononoke, Howl's Moving Castle, and My Neighbor Totoro. Since it is also the first Ghibli film, I want to see why Studio Ghibli is as popular as they are, why it is one of the leading anime studios, why it is for some people one of the best anime studios even more preferred than other renowned anime studios like Kyoto Animation, Ufotable, and Studio Mappa. So coming into the show, I was very excited to be entering the world of Ghibli films and the world of Hayao Miyazaki. Now that you have context on where I was prior to watching the show, you should know by now that I can't and won't be comparing The Boy and the Hare with other works from Miyazaki sensei and Ghibli, but I will be sharing my thoughts on the show and just my overall impression upon entering this uncharted world of anime films. So without further ado, let's begin with the review on The Boy and the Heron. I'ma begin with the animation, because when most people think of Ghibli, and when I say most people, I mean non-anime watchers, when most people think of Ghibli, they do not think of Hayao Miyazaki sensei, they think of the unique art style of the Ghibli films. From clips and images, even I, who has not watched a single Ghibli show before The Boy and the Heron, was aware that Studio Ghibli has a very distinguishable art style. But apparently, it was not only their art style that made their work stand out, it's also their animation style. It became apparent to me just shortly after the start of the show that Ghibli uses more still shot. What I mean by still shots is that the backgrounds don't move much. In a lot of scenes, they're just still images or they're just simple panning. And some of the shots were also used for a longer duration. So my impression was that the Ghibli animation style works with a more still background and an emphasis on the animation of the characters and foreground. If you have watched Ghibli works, I'm sure you are aware that the movements of the characters are incredibly smooth. When the wind blows, the hair and the clothes follow along the breeze so loosely and freely, and when the characters need to, their entire body just moves so swiftly and flexibly to give it a nice exaggeration. And this exaggerated movement, it is exactly the beauty of 2D animation and why all of us anime watchers are so fascinated and amazed by it. And with more focus on the foreground, they also have more freedom to animate the unique body shape of their characters and creatures. They can make their characters and animals do these abnormal exaggerated movements like in this scene with the grandmas and in this scene with the frogs. With a simpler background and a focus on the movement of the characters, they are also able to give background characters more movement. Sometimes they are just repeated animations, but they are still more movements for background characters than your average anime. And all of this helps to create a livelier animation. The background might not have insane perspective movements, I mean there are, but not as much as other anime, and they are much more still, but because of the well animated foreground and characters, the animation still looks very lively. And then let's talk about the art style. It has a very old animation look to the show, which is basically just how every Ghibli film looks like, but because the setting in The Boy and the Heron is during the World War II era, the old art style actually helps to give off the atmosphere of the time period. And as someone who mainly watches more contemporary anime, it is definitely refreshing and a nice change of things to watch a show with a more older look. The colors are dominated by more natural colors like brown and green, and they're not made to be vibrant, which is probably how they gave the Ghibli style an older aesthetic. Because of this, the show really gives off a much more calmer vibe as compared to, let's say, the more brighter look of KyoAni. And while we are on the topic of the aesthetics of the show, I also want to talk about the fantasy world in The Boy and the Heron. It's amazing how I've seen a fair amount of fantasy works, but the fantasy world in The Boy and the Heron still managed to feel different. It is highly likely due to the fact that most of the fantasy anime are adventure fantasy, those with guilds, demon lords, adventurers, and magic spells. But the film reminded me once again that fantasy is about the creativity in building your own world. your own creatures, your own name for the creatures, giving roles to the different creatures in your world. It was really fun to just explore the fantasy world that Miyazaki-sensei has built in The Boy and the Heron. And I'm sure this also goes for other works of Miyazaki-sensei. If other works from Miyazaki-sensei also has the same sense of imagination The Boy and the Heron has, then I can understand why people are so fascinated by his works. He just creates his own completely unique world that even stands out within its own genre. With all this praise for the animation and art style, you will probably expect me to continue glorifying other aspects of the film. However, it pains me to say that that's about all the praise I can give the show. Despite the fluid movements of the animation and the unique aesthetic of the art style, the production quality falls short in the voice acting. I didn't expect a show of this caliber to have dubbing scenes that just seems unprofessional. When you have watched the show, you will have realized Mahito's character is a pretty quiet and monotone person, at least when he talks with his family members. So it is okay when the majority of the time his voice also sounds relatively monotone. However, there were also some more expressive scenes, but his voice still remained monotone, at least in my opinion. The same also goes for Himi. There is this one scene at the end when she reunited with Mahito. It was a very emotional scene, but both their voices really did not feel like they presented the complete emotion of the characters there. It might be due to the fact that the movements of the characters were just so exaggerated and the voices just weren't able to keep up with that. But whatever the cause, there were just some scenes where the voice acting didn't seem like it fit the moment. Now, moving on to the story. Here is how I would summarize the story. Sometime after Mahito lost his mother, together with his dad, he moved to the home of his new stepmother. One day her stepmother got lost, and with the help of the Heron, Mahito has to travel to a different world to find her. That is basically the main story from how I see it. Some people, however, argue that the main idea of the show is about Mahito moving on from the misery caused by the death of her mother and finding quote-unquote life as he travels through the other world. Firstly, I find this moving on theme really uninteresting by now. It's just a general common theme in anime shows, and all three anime films that I've watched this year also revolved around this theme. Suzune, The First Slam Dunk, and now The Boy and the Heron. It's a nice theme when it's used well, but otherwise it's just a standard development. Okay, that's a part of the show, but it's not something I can give the show points for. And secondly, I'm not able to see how this message is conveyed in the film. There wasn't much drama. The film focused on the story of Mahito traveling through the world, so it might have been very subtle. I was paying close attention throughout the entire film and was also trying to find the bigger picture of the story, and even I was not able to see this message being present in the film. I understand the grief Mahito experienced from the loss of his mother, but I don't get the moving on part, especially when people say that Mahito finds life after exploring the world. I don't really see the scenes that showed Mahito has moved on. I can see that Mahito seems to be more happy at the end of the film, but is that really what people mean when they say Mahito has moved on? Or is it because Mahito now accepts his stepmother? But my argument against that is, how and when did Mahito learn to accept his stepmother? What exactly did he experience that made him now happy and more grateful? Okay, I can see how Mahito learned to open up to people, but it didn't feel like it was anything special. Maybe it might have something to do with the fact that I can exactly relate to Mahito's position, but I just didn't feel his development. I really need someone to explain this argument with examples from scenes that show this development in Mahito, which might be difficult considering the lack of access to the scenes. But otherwise, it's not something that I can give credit to the show for. The only bigger picture message that I can understand is the symbolism of the world in The Boy and the Heron as Miyazaki's world. I actually didn't figure out the symbolism myself, but rather I heard it from another animanga YouTuber named Kito Senpai, and from a YouTube short from a YouTuber with the name of Little Queso. So I have to give credit to these two for the idea. Go check out their videos for the full explanation. I will link their videos down in the description. But in short, the idea is that the world that Mahito enters is a symbol to Miyazaki's world, aka his stories, and the fact that the world is collapsing is symbolic to how soon his stories will be no more because Miyazaki-sensei is now of old age. And if we want to extrapolate this further, the entire story might be a reference to real life and how kids who are unhappy in real life are able to find joy in the world of Hayao Miyazaki, just like how Mahito found joy in the world he traveled to. How the world of Miyazaki came so randomly out of nowhere, but he cultivated it to become something so beautiful. However, it had to end because he had no one to succeed him. Maybe this is the true message of The Boy and the Heron, an allegory to Miyazaki sensei and his works. And if that is the case, then I probably could accept this. That is actually something amazing. Because if I am going to rate the story of the show without looking at the bigger picture, I might have to give it a bad rating because there are a lot of questions left unanswered. For example, why did Mahito's stepmom have to give birth in this other world? And what was the significance of giving birth in this other world? How did present-day Kiriko become a statue? What happened after Mahito opened the gate just after he entered the world? Why was it a taboo? Why were there minifigures of the grandma, and how did they get to this world? What did the Heron mean when he said Mahito's mother was still alive, because at the end, she wasn't? I know there was Himi, but she's different. And finally, if Himi and Kiriko were tasked to take care of the world, does that mean the both of them constantly traveled between worlds? Since they came from their own timeline, it wouldn't make sense that they permanently stayed in that world. The only credit I can give to the story is the use of foreshadowing, like for example, the foreshadow that Himi is actually Mahito's mother through her fire powers, and the foreshadow that Kiriko and Himi came from the past considering their age. But to me, the main highlight of the film is not the story, but rather just us, the audience, exploring and taking a look at the fantasy world that Hayao Miyazaki sensei has created in The Boy and the Heron. We're seeing Mahito going to different places in the world, and all of the different places have their own bizarre setting and characteristics. Even without the themes, it's simply captivating entering into this world of imagination. And with that, maybe that was the true essence of The Boy and the Heron, just exploring the fantasy world Miyazaki sensei has created from the perspective of Mahito, a child, because the world of Hayao Miyazaki sensei might not last that much longer.
スタジオの将来はもうはっきりしてますよ。やっていけなくなります。それはもう目に見えてる。それ心配しててしょうがないです。どうにもならないです。
Overall, I had a fun experience watching the film. After all, it was my first time watching a film by Hayao Miyazaki sensei and my first time watching a Ghibli film in general. But the questions still remain, is it a good film? If the intentions are true, that The Boy and the Heron is a symbolism to Hayao Miyazaki sensei's works and children exploring his works, then I would say it is good. Absolutely amazing theme. But if you're talking about the story, or about the whole theme with Mahito moving on, then I don't think the film did well there. Because I didn't get it, I didn't feel it, and there were a lot of questions left unanswered from the story. The Boy and the Heron is a very interesting film to analyze and talk about because it didn't seem straightforward with its messages and in conveying the bigger picture of the show, so I am curious as to what Hayao Miyazaki sensei's intentions are with the film. On the production side of things, it was, as expected, really beautifully directed and produced. However, there were some problems on the voice acting side. So, that will be the summary for my review on The Boy and the Heron. What do you guys think? The film didn't seem to earn a unanimous rating within the community. It has been pretty a mix actually. Some were able to deduce the bigger picture of the show while others weren't completely fond of it. So what do you guys think about the film? I'm curious to see even more opinion on what other people think about the film. I haven't watched other Ghibli films, but how would you compare the show to other Ghibli films? As someone who hasn't watched other works from Miyazaki sensei, would you say that his films are also similar to The Boy and the Heron? Feel free to share your thoughts down below. And with that, marks the end of the video. Unlike some of my other videos where I included some jokes and comedy, this video has been more on the serious end. But what do you guys think though? Do you prefer more of a serious review or one with some comedy to it? Let me know cause it'll help me with writing my script. As usual, don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe for other anime reviews. Thanks a lot for watching, I appreciate it, I'll see you in my next video.